Herzlich willkommen zurück hier ins HORSCH Live-Studio. Mein Name ist Michael Braun und ich darf heute durchs Programm begleiten. Ja, für uns ist der zweite Tag HORSCH Live eine echte Besonderheit und zwar haben wir dieses Mal internationales Publikum dabei in 4 Sprachen. Das heißt, alle Beiträge gibt es in Deutsch natürlich, in Englisch, in Russisch und in Französisch. Von dem her freue ich mich auch auf eine interessante Diskussion über den Chat, der offen ist für alle Sprachen, wo wir natürlich dann auch Fragen herausnehmen und diese auf der Bühne beantworten werden. Ein Hinweis noch an der Stelle, alle Beiträge werden im Anschluss auch verfügbar sein. Das heißt, wir werden die auf unsere Kanäle, zum Beispiel YouTube, hochladen und auch im Anschluss für Sie bereitstellen. Ja, unser erster Beitrag heute beschäftigt sich mit der Thematik Düngung, maximale Stickstoffeffizienz durch eine ausgewogene Pflanzenernährung. Ich glaube, das klingt in den Ohren von vielen Leuten momentan sehr wohlwollend bei den aktuellen Versorgungssituationen hinsichtlich Dünger und vor allem bei den aktuellen Preisen für Dünger ist natürlich die Frage groß, was kann ich tun, um eine möglichst hohe Effizienz rauszuholen, was kann ich vielleicht auch mit anderen Nährstoffen und Mikronährstoffen erreichen, um eine möglichst ausgewogene Pflanze zu bekommen. Mit der Fragestellung beschäftigt sich Adrian Urban von der Firma YARA.
Adrian Urban
Adrian
deals
ist
for,
dort
he comes from the
Geschäftsentwickler für
company
den
YARA,
Bereich
and he is
Lohnunternehmer,
developer
war
for the area
vorher 5 Jahre lang
contractors,
Fachberater, steckt
and
also dort
5
tief
years
in
he
der
was
Materie
also
drin, wenn es um
consultant.
Pflanzenernährung geht.
He knows
Und Adrian
all
beherrscht
about
das
the
Ganze
nutrition
nicht
of
nur
plant, and
theoretisch,
Adrian
sondern auch
doesn't only
praktisch. Als
know the
Landwirtssohn
theory of
ist er
it, but
natürlich
also
auch
the
selbst ab und
practice.
zu mit dem
And he is
Düngerspreuer
also
unterwegs
a
und
son
bringt
of a farmer,
Nährstoffe
and of course he's also
zielgerecht
out
für die
there
Pflanzen aus.
spraying nutrients in
Adrian, ich
order
freue
to
mich auf deinen
apply them.
Vortrag und
Adrian,
im
I'm very
Anschluss auf
much
eine
looking
spannende
forward to your
Diskussion.
presentation and to a great discussion afterwards. Michael, thank you so much for this friendly introduction and greeting. We could think that the market is going crazy. It's like topics like, availability, costs in stocks and scarcity and price increases, which are being discussed by everybody. Hello, my name is Adrian Urban. I have been working at YARA for 4 years, and I am there working as the development of contractors. And before that, I was working as a consultant in the states of Bavaria of Norwegian fertilizer plants. I grew up in a farm, and also I was growing up in the district Heidenheim, and the farm was taken over by my brother. And after my studies in Triesdorf in the industry, I love to be there in the practical agriculture industry. I'm very much looking forward to talk here about HORSCH Life, something about the fertilizer, about the increasing maximization of the N efficiency. And we have 2 blogs. First of all, I'm going to talk about the fertilizer market, and then we will have the topic, how can we maximize the N efficiency due to balanced plant nutrition, and then I will give you a small outlook on further development in this segment. With this slide, I'd like to get started, and I would like to reflect, the fertilization years of 1920 and 21 and 22. You see that here, that the nitrogen quantity increased by 7%, would decrease by 7% from 2019 to 2020. The entire amount of nitrogen decreased by 7.1%. If I look into here, urea, you can see here a significant decrease. This is because of the lawmaker. Urea is the largest loser on the nitrogen fertilizer market with 20%. You see here for the NS, that means nitrogen, sulfur fertilizer. We have an increase. This is a trend which was established over the past years. We have the parts which are increasing, but if you look, at the long term, the sales of mineral fertilizers in Germany, we see an average level of 1.6 million. tons. And from this, average level, over the past year, since 2015, we only had a downward trend, and we had a decrease of about 1/4 to the level we have now. And on the lower one, you see here the curve of potash on phosphate. You also see here over the years a significant decrease. You can see it clear with the phosphate. How does the nitrogen fertilizer production work in Europe? The raw material is, the waste gas, which is used in order to generate hydrogen, and this is of course very energy intensive. And the Haber-Bosch reaction, the hydrogen is produced with nitrogen from the air, and it's converted to ammonia, and ammonia becomes also here, which is ammonia, and with calgamon, and reacts with sulfur. And this process here, here we also have CO2, and CO2 can react with ammonia to urea. This is the basis of the nitrogen fertilizer. And a very important point here is the energy carrier waste gas, and the price for waste gas in Europe has increased in January and March significantly. You see it here, the fluctuations. We have average monthly values here. And the fluctuation here, you can see it's way more pronounced than the line. It gives us cause to presume it's between 22 to 40 US dollars per MMBTU. This is the unit in which gas is traded. Last week, the price was about €31. On an international level, we can also see the increase of the gas prices. However, this applies very much to Europe. When we have a look at all this graph, you can see here different countries, and in Europe we have a very high gas price because we do not have a redundant energy market. This is often demand. It's different in Egypt, where the price for natural gas is fixed, where it does not fluctuate. The European producers are, in competition to the producers other countries which have calculated with lower natural gas prices. The high costs we have right now for the mineral fertilizer do not depend, are not influenced by the waste gas price. It depends very much on the offer and the demand. European urea is so expensive right now that the marketing on the national level is not attractive at present. Let's have a look at the agricultural market. Let's have a look at the wheat prices. Wheat is volatile, which is currently at a high level. This makes the production of wheat interestingly. The agriculture, the farmer can earn money with his products, and will also therefore also invest in fertilizer, first of all, in order to secure the harvest. And of course, in order to increase the yield, where you have fertilizer utilization, and this increases the yield, and for that you need fertilization, and this also increases the demand on the fertilizer market, and this leads to those urea listings you can see on this area since January. The mineral fertilizer prices go up. Why is this the case? Why is the price so high? Worldwide, we have a high demand for urea and also for grain. Alone, India needs 10 million tons of urea per year. On the other side, we have export limitations. from China, Russia, Turkey. And on top of it, in Europe, we have diminished production capacities. What is also a point which needs to be considered from the European side is the weak, exchange rate. The euro, dropped compared with the US dollar. So if you wish to purchase mineral fertilizer in the world market, it's more expensive now since the Europe is weakened. If the energy goes down, that does not mean necessarily that also fertilizer prices drop as well, because at the time being the demand is the decisive criterion, and the production costs, they cover the price to push it to the bottom, but they are not necessarily linked to the sales price. At the time being, the demand is larger than the offer on the world market. We have different, influence factors which have an impact on the price formation of fertilizers. Let's have a look at the price at the sales situation on the free market. You can see the offer function. It's increasing. The higher the price, the more is offered, and the demand function. And you see, where they meet, this is the balance between the price at which price they're buying. It's a volatile market. For instance, we can see it with soy, for instance. An influence on this equilibrium on the market in the agricultural industry is the weather, of course, which has an impact on the yield, the political situation, and also the international markets. Let's have a look at the energy costs, at the prices, for waste gas, and the demand is high at present. The storage capacities are low. For winter, you need to build up reserves, and the demand is larger because the world economy is growing, and the demand in many areas has grown, and the supplies they leave to wait in the capacities of the waste gas producing companies is not increasing. And there's an additional factor to be considered is the transportation waste shipment. Shipment is important, that the transportation waste to Europe are scarce because Europe imports mineral fertilizer, and the self-supply for potash is 15%, for phosphate we only have a third, and for nitrogen 1/3 of the demand needs to be imported. Means Europe is a net importer of fertilizers, and therefore we need to get our coverage from the world market. And the fertilizers which are imported, of course, they have to be transported. And if you have a look at the development of the freight prices here from Egypt to France, for instance, with a seaport, you see here dollars per ton. You see a real skip of the prices. And this does not only apply to to sea prices, where the prices almost doubled within a year. It also applies to any lorries and to inland seaports. So freight capacities are less available. There's less movement, and for that reason, also the supplies, are also in the backlogs. How much that is difficult to say at the moment, because they think that the first delivery is there for the first administration. We have it the longest time to deliver it. What is interesting to see what is the relationship, how it's going to look like in the future. And from August, I had the outlook from November. You see the urea balance. And it's easy to see based on the information available at the moment. We can see worldwide a urea demand backlog for the next months. That means for the first quarter in 2022, we will see that we will have a more demand than what we will have to supply. But this is going to be a change as of April, as of the second quarter, and there we will have more commodities available. But in April, this is usually the first administration of fertilizer is done already, and the further we look into the future, the more difficult it becomes to assess the situation. But at present, on the short-term notice, we see on the demand side more demand compared with the offer. And with that, let's come to a frequently posed question. Very often somebody asks me the question, is fertilization worth at these high prices at all? And therefore, we made a calculation as an example. What does a 20% saving on wheat mean, for instance, 20% nitrogen mean? And as a basis, we took 118 nitrogen increase trials which were conducted between the years 2010 2019, and there once we had a 100% variation of calculation of the nitrogen volume and compared with the minus 20% variation, and that calculation looks as follows. We assume a winter wheat price of 22 euro per ton, and this price is way higher right now. And you see the higher Monza price of 70 euro per DC ton, and the Tigermon nitric acid can be purchased at a lower price, and we take the price there. We have a yield of 93.3 D tons with a 100% of fertilization, and the variations compared with that is minus 20%, and nitrogen showed about 5 D tons less, and this is the basic assumption: 100% relatively high yield and 93% and minus 20%. This is 88.5 D tons. This leads to costs of the fertilization of 460 and 370 euro. Of course, we have savings potential, but the decisive moment here is how can the wheat be sold, and we see that about 100 euro difference. There's this difference between those things. If we deduct the fertilization cost, we can see it's not worth, under this prediction to restrict the nitrogen fertilization, because with the 100% variation, the yield is still higher than with a reduced variation. And that means fertilization is worth it, but only when the price for nitric acid is over 80 euro. Then in this example, then a reduction of the fertilization by 20% would be worth it. Let's briefly summarize. On the market, we have the share of the sulfur fertilizers increase. The energy prices in Europe are at a very high level, and the energy prices are not the reason currently for the situation on the nitrogen market, for the prices on the nitrogen market, because also in countries where the nitrogen price is the same level, they have lower gas prices. So it does not correlate. The countries which have low gas prices, they still have high prices for mineral fertilizers. In Germany, right now, we have a low supply quota during this fertilization year, and a nitrogen fertilization is worth it, and the price for agricultural raw materials are high. The wheat prices are high, and we still expect high prices which will lead, to a high demand for fertilizers amongst the manufacturers. We see that they have low stocks, the European producers, and there is more demand than offer. It will persist over the next months. And all this summarized. This is enough that YARA recommends to split the purchase of fertilizers, if possible, because, to have those 3 days in the first part, you should purchase before the summer. If we look in retrospect, to the last 10 years, it was really, worth it to purchase the mineral fertilizer at site to be able to react when you need it in order not to be affected from the increased price over the 8 to 10 years. And further part of the fertilizer to buy this in winter and springtime in order to split the risk. It's the same with the marketing of wheat, not, really to bet on one horse, but on different horses. Then let's come to the expert part concerning how to maximize the end efficiency due to a balanced plant nutrition. In Germany, the winter wheat is a very important, culture, and the crop and the yield is very important and is influenced by the nutrition, by the fertilization, and the farmer here can be very happy because it looks wonderful. And this is also about the next year. What is important for that next year? I brought you here about a slide about sulfur fertilization. On the left side, you see it 3 times with calcomon, nitric acid. Was a fertilizer. We had a yield of 89 D tons. It's a good yield area. Could be truncated also with the protein of 12.6%. But if you look further, here we have the administration of a sulfur and nitrogen fertilizer with 18 kilogram increases the yield significantly. We see an increased yield with the same nitrogen amount. If the sulfur amount is increased and sulfur is fertilized later, you see this has a positive impact on the raw protein. The quality can be influenced by the sulfur in a positive manner, and the yields can be increased. What's the reason for that? Sulfur is a protein builder. Sulfur is also part of the enzymatic processes, and once sulfur is missing, the nitrogen cannot be transformed, converted into yield, and not be converted into a protein. Very important is the sulfur fertilization at the beginning of vegetation, because sulfur in sulfate form, this is the only form how the plant can absorb it. It's mobile in the soil. It's an anion. It has a negative charge and can be washed out over winter. So when you have, a certain rain and precipitation in wintertime, the sulfur will be, put to the lower, and the young plant cannot absorb the sulfur. And the mineralization of sulfur takes only place with higher temperatures. And therefore, it's very important to start fertilizing sulfur during the beginning of vegetation. During the time at the consultation, I was also in charge of some trials. I brought you a picture of some parcels. You can see here the control here. There was no fertilization. It does not look good. If you look at the left-hand side, this is where we had a nitrogen fertilization, and you can see that's really amazing. You have a better stock, better plants. The coloring is better, but it's still not optimal, because if you have a look to the right-hand side, the only difference here is it's the same nitrogen point that you also have sulfur in the fertilization. I think it's a very important factor for the growth and also for any grain cultivation. But we can see what is our fertilization strategy which leads to a success. That means the first administration should be early and high with a certain nitrate for a quick start, and depending on the blend, in order to allow to get started early. 10 to 15 kilograms of sulfate sulfur are obligation for the first administration of fertilization. It can be given, but there are many indicators that a split, when we split the sulfur administration, that this is promising. In particular, later sulfur fertilization increases the quality. What we see very often in practice, that the last administration of sulfur is too late. Please don't do it too late in order to maximize your process. This is, it's PBCH in week 37, 39. If you later administration lead to the point that more sulfur is converted into protein, and the way from nitrogen to the yield is way more effective than the way from the nitrogen into the protein. This is why you do that, during the new regulations we have for fertilization, and also in view of the prices. The highest efficiency we have, of course, in particular when we have, drought and when we have a late administration, nitrate is very quick and it can be absorbed very quickly, even during times of drought. As I mentioned before, let's place the focus on the yield and not on high protein contents. This is, also what is said. And also the administration split is also, state of the art. That this administration split means, an active, stock keeping and remaining active. The same applies, to the grassland. Also combine N fertilization with sulfur, no urea, culture specific, leaf fertilizer for vital and yield-rich stocks. And when we have, weak stocks which have not come out of the winter in the optimum way, you can, support them with a phosphate leaf fertilization in spring. Sulfur does not only play an important role for the grains and for the grassland, but it's also very important for the sugar beet, in particular for the rape. We will see that later. I can see that here. I showed you the sulfur need from many cultures. Very important to know that all cultures need sulfur for some time. We have, one stumblebone when it's about the sulfur thing. This declaration here, the need, of the recommend sulfur fertilization is here in the element form. Is it rapeseed? You need 40 kilogram of S. This is the element form, and not the sulfur trioxide form, which you can see very often the declarations of sulfur. See, when SO3 is, you have to multiply it with the factor 0.4 in order to really have the content from the house of YARA for 25 years. We have a classical, this is a YARA Bella sulfan, calcamon nitric acid with sulfur and calcium for the optimal nitrogen sulfur nutrition. Always a very important culture in Germany is here. Let's come to maize, to corn. And for the maize, very often, you have an administration, the manure, liquid manure, which you apply, and they will also have the underroot fertilization. And there's also a couple of things which need to be taken into account. It's not only about phosphor and nitrogen on the other side. It's two extremely important nutrients for the maize. Phosphor, for instance, because the young maize plant has, a low phosphate absorption rate, and phosphate is important for the root growth during young stage. But the phosphate we are restricted now, and this we also need, boron, important because this is supports the growth of the roots, and the phosphate can only be absorbed, with the roots, and it's important. This is why all the measures taken to support the root development. For that, we need to have a pre-fertilization in order to really increase the phosphate efficiency. But zinc supply is important for the metabolism in the plant to optimize that. When we have enough zinc, zinc is also important for the length growth. If we have enough, zinc, this brings, a high mice, and the length growth will be stimulated, and also the cell split and the processes work with that only when zinc is optimal. Supply. With the boron, there's another point, is fertility. Boron makes we have, absolutely good crops, and if they are not well done, boron is very important for the cell walls and for assimilate transport to the plant. Zinc and boron, through the under root fertilization, the mice, we also have the opportunity with a leaf treatment with micronutrients. Another important nutrient, in particular in the young thing, is sulfur. Sulfur also is that in liquid manure, but not in a sufficient measure. The mineralization from organic parts and sulfur takes place only at a later moment. If we wish to increase the efficiency, even with maize corn in the young stage, it's important to have water-soluble parts. Later, the maize really profits from the mineralization from the floor. When we have warm temperatures, the nitrogen is dissolved and sulfur, and the maize profits from that. But in the beginning, you have to pay attention to the sulfur supply. Another nutrient important is magnesium. If you look, at the maize part, it's a large green from this chlorophyll. And in the central part is magnesium, which is also part of, protein and starch. It's the activator of many enzymes. And as we said, the liquid manure fertilization before the sowing of the maize, which biogas or we have. This leads that magnesium, there's an antagonism, that magnesium can be less perceived, absorbed. This is why magnesium fertilization leads to, counteract this magnesium under root fertilization in order to provide optimal growth. This is looks in, when we have a boron deficiency, it's an extreme here. You have a patchy grain set, you have poor rooting, the young leaves dry up, and this is and you have a zinc. When we have, the leaf, is there. It's we have here, necrotic spots, leaves deformed, and here we see it here, and the distribution, accuracy of mixed fertilizer is very important here. In Nienburg, we were running their trial, the administered fertilizer nutrient concentration were here. Born, the blue line is born, and although we had a high quality mix, we had high fluctuation in practice. Some plants received way more nutrients than the others, and some way less. A very good, mixed fertilized here. Some uncertainty with nitrogen, that is acceptable because the micronutrient boron, this was not sufficient, and the more the fertilizer is away from the dosage unit, and the larger we have a challenge. Here you can see here a comparison with and without, under root fertilization. So it's absolutely necessary to do that. If we talk about, nutrient efficiency and nitrogen efficiency, then we always come, the Tonne here from Fleming, because this is the nutrient which is important. That not only nutrients can limit the efficiency, like here zinc, for instance, but also, the floor, the cultivation, the species, and also plant protection, all are factors, and all are factors which, depend on each other, and which can also inhibit the efficiency of nitrogen. This is why when in agriculture, farming, you always have to see the micronutrients are one part. You have to look at all the factors, and here I have shown here all the trace elements, removal of trace elements in green. You can see the nutrients which need to be fertilized, under normal regulations. We have, for grain, we have sugar beets. They also need mangan. And boron is standard, and manganese, in some farms they do not use manganese, and the manganese fertilization in rapeseed is very important here. Maize, as mentioned before, we have boron and zinc play a very important role in particular during the early development, and here we have a combination from the underroot fertilization. For the micronutrients, this is not about the absolute, contents in the floor. It's about availability. And we have factors, for instance, the pH value, where the micronutrients availability. This can affect negatively or positively the micronutrient supply. One factor which increases this is the drought, which diminishes the availability of the micronutrients. Once we have, it's dry, we have a problem really, in perceiving it. This is why it's very important before we come into a stress situation to supply micronutrients in order to prevent and to better survive stress situations. Micronutrients also play a very important, decisive role, for the defense of the plants. The defense of the plants, they are strengthened when the plant, has, a balanced nutrition. You have here, cellular lignin synthesis. When we have enough copper, it will be moved. That means the cells are more stable, and they can, withstand, the attack of any fungi. And cell stability is very important. Next to calcium and boron, plays a very important role. We can look at the boron as, as an armor, and we say we have dismustasis, superoxide dismustasis. They are to take the toxicity out of the plant. A very important part: copper, manganese, and zinc. When you see, the detox processes, it's very important to have enough manganese and zinc in there. And the integrity here is important of membrane. It prevents the leak of a leak, and boron and zinc play an important role. And membrane ingredient prevents assimilation leakage from cell, boron and zinc, and so they can process cellulose way better if we have just one nutrient deficiency. For all the cultures, it's important to talk about the demands or to cultivation, what nutrients are important in order to add them also, and not only to have a look at nitrogen. We come here, to our summary and outlook. The first administration, the nutrient sulfur fertilizer should be bought here very early. So big bag where gives an advantage also during the storage. Mineral fertilizer by different stages in order to split the risk of the prices. And the first part, how large it should be, I would say that the major part should be bought before the harvest, and the end fertilization is economic in view of the present framework condition, in particular worldwide. The fertilizer demand is very high over the next months. We will still have an increased demand compared with what we have. The expert there, it's important. Sulfur fertilization is very important. This micronutrients is a small adjusting screw. They increase the crop and also the resistance force and the defense of the plant. And they are important for the nitrogen balance. And of course, an underroot fertilization should be used with a young corn where no mixing for optimal starting begin 20 to 40 kilogram nitrogen, 20 to 40 kilogram of phosphate for optimal start conditions. And of course, administration split, active, stock keeping, and to be able to act for wheat and grassland. The beginning of vegetation, we cannot save any mineral fertilizer. It would not make sense. There are cultures which can live with less, nitrogen, like maize or sugar beet, which have the main growth in summertime where the mineralization is very high. There you can save a little bit nitrogen, or rye, and also all the others, rapeseed, and also when we apply less nitrogen, the oil content correlate to some. At the time being, we hear a lot about jubils, pre-cash offers at very cheap prices. Please be cautious if you receive offers like that. And for my outlook, I would like to talk about the CO2 neutral ammonia nitrate production, and the topic of climate change is omnipresent, and mineral fertilizer is a very energy intensive area. And I already explained that the natural gas is used in order to produce hydrogen. We can also produce hydrogen directly through the electrolysis. For that you need power, and this can be produced, generated by renewable energies, water, hydropower, photovoltaics, or wind power. And this hydrogen can be used in the Haber-Bosch process in order to produce ammonia, and ammonia is the base, the raw material for the ammonia nitrate fertilizer production. If green hydrogen is produced, and this is what we work, intensively on, we already have climate plants where we produce green, then we do not have any CO2 emission, and the urea production is difficult because the CO2 source is missing in the process. Well, I'd like to conclude my presentation with a quote from Michael Richter: "What remains is the change, and what changes is what remains." And who wishes to remain in contact with me, and if you wish to have any contact information on fertilization in general, you can find me on Instagram, Düneberatung _Adrian. I have actual topic. Thank you very much for your attention.
Vielen Dank.
Adrian, thank you so much. I think your presentation showed very much the complexity of the two dimensions. One side, the dimension on the market, where we see the situation which we have, what we have not seen, that one, and then the complexity when it's about how to optimal, provide an optimal nutrition to a plant, the humid phases and the dry phases. And your presentation was very received a lot of interest. We picked out a couple of questions, but I'd like to start with the most pressing questions. And of course, this is about the topic, how do we deal with the current fertilizer market? One question was the purchase strategies. We do not have any fertilizer. How would you, define a short-term fertilizer purchase strategy? How would you deal that? To give a recommendation, that's difficult because we are very on an all-time high price. I would recommend sit down and then, and calculate the production process. Say, is it really worth to use the mineral fertilizer utilization? To which extent could we reduce mineral fertilization? If we have not purchased any mineral fertilizer, I think it would be great to buy something, because if you order mineral fertilizer, we need a certain time, and then the delivery would be in January. You should not be waiting, because in February the new fertilization season starts. Who does not have any fertilizer? It's a risk. I would strongly recommend you think about to buy something, even if the price level is high. It's very difficult to give a broadcast, but the fertilization dot is close by. Also think that in your summary you mentioned it well. The administration of winter wheat we cannot break down, because we need to activate our own stocks in order to have a development. The second question was the same, the availability topic, which you have already addressed. When I order today, do I have a chance to receive something in February, by the end of February, or in the beginning of March to get starting? We see the warehouses, of course, are not as well filled as it was before. I would not say that that there's a scarcity of mineral fertilizer. We are aware, but maybe not the brand you want to have. Maybe you wish to do some compromises, but the decisive point is the price. Are we ready to pay the price which is charged for all the fertilizers right now, not only for the nitrogen fertilizer? Let's go further. The first administration of fertilizer, the organic fertilizers, they become more popular. We can see it during all the discussions. How would you see an HCK? So, for instance, like a manure from chicken, how would you assess that, and how would you look? I have a company, mineral fertilization. Due to the development, of course, the value of organic fertilizer increasing. They say, of course, let's use more, manure, liquid or manure from chicken in dry form, and the amounts are limited. But what you have to envision is, in the beginning, organic fertilizers have a gap in efficiency, because they do not act as quickly. It's part of the nitrogen is organically bound. It needs to be mineralized first. During the vegetation time, it comes and it affects. But for some cultures, their organic fertilizer is better. If we take rapeseed, for instance, it's different. Organic fertilization in spring doesn't make any sense, because until it really gets started, the rapeseed is done with the nitrogen absorption. And this is for the beginning of the absorption. We need a quickly acting mineral fertilizer with a certain nitrate share. They have an advantage depending on the cold situations, and with a nitrate accentuated fertilizer. This is better in warmer regions. The dynamic the end dynamic could get started better. The organic fertilizer can be an option, but on average, an adjusted first administration cannot be replaced compared with a mineral fertilizer. If I say I'm there with a farm and I have a look at different cultures, organic fertilizer, I said the winter wheat, I would say at the beginning no, but other cultures, for instance, maize, which will need nutrients at a later time, or the sunflowers, that's something, give something as a recommendation. How would you assess it? Yes, I agree. You always have to have a look at what kind of culture do I have and what can I do. The fertilizer I have here, the mineral organic fertilizer, how can I use them in an optimal manner? And as already said, we have cultures which you can do with less nitrogen. And then if we wish to produce a high quality wheat, you cannot do anything with organic, just a little part. But in particular, in the beginning, it's very difficult, and in particular, in order to reach the qualities, and for that, you need us to have a certain mineral share. You have to see the wheat which is sown now, it's sown, it needs to be fertilized, and to a certain extent, you can, react with summer cultures to plant cultures which, need less nitrogen. One question, for the spring cultures, where they have a direct sowing, and so the N administration in May, should we split it up, or should we just apply it once? I would administer, first under root fertilization, because under direct seed condition, the phosphorus dynamic is a little restricted, and they come, and the rooting is a little worse, and the phosphate availability is corrected with the floor temperature, with a high temperature. The phosphate supply is better, meaning under root fertilization with nitrogen and phosphate in order to provide a good start, and therefore we should not, exaggerate, because too many amounts, will make the plant to wilt or have it burn. If the technology is not optimal, if the distances are not optimally set, with 5 centimeters next and 5 centimeters under the seed grain, so don't take too large quantity, and I would do that quickly, and then, ahead fertilization after sowing, or with maize, you have to take care not to have any burns, and during the direct sowing, you have to pay attention, because you are not going to working in the fertilizer. Here you have to pay attention to the loss potential. Urea, whether it's whether urea's inhibitor is always degassing, you always have certain ammonia losses, and this is what you have to counteract, and this is something you have to pay attention to. And I would, recommend under root fertilization, but we could also think about procedures, mineral fertilizer, to inject it, or to inject liquid manure, or and just put it inside, and there are different possibilities to increase efficiency with a whole. If you say nitrogen 30%, I would say 40 kilogram under root maximal. It's not only a fourth of what the maize knows and has a need for. Let's come to the micronutrients from kilograms per hectare to the gram per hectare. One question from the chat. You were talking about nutrient supply we need. When we look at the grains, what what are the micronutrients which are most likely to be deficient. It's a very good buzzword, you know. With plant, you need to have a plant analysis where we can prevent and make visible deficiency. What we see very often, if take for instance wheat, manganese, you know, very often is fertilized through the leaves. It's very important. Very often you see it easier, but what is very often forgotten, zinc, phosphor and zinc when it's about grain. I would pay attention to copper, manganese and zinc, and low dosage of boron in the grain is important. In particular for the in terms of fertility. At what times, if we take the wheat, at what time do you think this is the administration is most best? Shortly before the beginning of the maize, the corn grass massive growth. This would be, you know, most effective to use the leaf fertilization, you know, copper, manganese, a little boron. That makes sense, but also before the winter, in order to increase the winter resistance with small areas, with herbicide measure before the end of vegetation, manganese, zinc spraying, and other than that, during the main growth time, the shooting part, and the one. This is where the micronutrient is most effective. In terms of drought, sometimes it's little that we still hope that the rain will come, but then we have to see, you know, that the hope is there. Does it make sense to apply micronutrients during a drought, or is that more, you know, a load or additional stress to the plant? That depends very much which form you use. When the plant has already stress for dryness, and then you come additional salts to the leaves during times when you have high temperatures and low moisture, low humidity. This is not as efficient. When the plant has a deficiency of micronutrients, then it's already done. We should prevent it before a drought. We should apply the leaf fertilizer in the stress, and not to add on to the stress with a leaf fertilizer. It really depends on the quality and the form of the leaf fertilizer. Thank you so much for this very comprehensive answer. I think you can see, you know, based on the question, that this topic is very interested, and our audience is very much interested in your topic. From my side, thank you so much for your interesting presentation, for the interesting discussion. We could have been able to continue our discussion for 30 minutes, but we have to adhere to our timelines. And without any further ado, I will come back within a few minutes with the next presentation.